so now we want to welcome to the stage our keynote speaker today, who's Dr. Robert Califf. Dr. Califf is a prominent cardiologist and clinical trial expert who has served as FDA commissioner not once but twice. And he is now going to give us some thoughts about neuromuscular disease research and the regulatory environment, and we're really looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Thanks, and it's great to be with you, and it's amazing you guys are on time. Very impressive. And I had Sharon sent me a bunch of stuff to read, which I love to do before an event like this, because I've become, I guess, the ultimate generalist, as I'll talk about, and you all are talking about a lot of details that are impossible for me to keep up with. But I really enjoyed reading the material, and in fact, lifted a couple of her slides because I think they really made the point about where we should be headed. I have been FDA commissioner twice, but I'm back to my origins now. I've unretired from Duke University for the second time now, and I'm back being an instructor in medicine, which was my title in 1980 when I started out on the faculty. But for fun, they've given me the title of chief provocateur, so I'll see if I can hold up to that title as I go forward here. I want to start by just talking about three large themes that are affecting all of us, that as you think about your specific activities, I hope that you will keep in mind as you seek balance in what you're doing to achieve your goals. The first is that we're at this amazing time, I think, in biomedical science and healthcare delivery, where the opportunities are just astounding, and what's already been said here has made that point quite well. But at least as I look at it, we do have amazing talent in the United States. I hope we will continue to have amazing talent. I don't know about the places you're associated with, but I know at Duke we've already started rescinding PhD offers that were already given because we just are not going to have the money to fund the investigators. And we're also hearing that they're getting a lot of messages from Canada, Europe, and Asia saying come to our countries because we are supporting biomedical researchers. Everyone's talking about AI and digital health, and I think it is really ready for prime time. I'll say a bit more about that. And speaking from the perspective of having just finished leading the FDA, the advent of platform technologies where it is eerily similar to a cartridge situation for some of the therapies that we're seeing, and a tremendous way to speed up drug development when you can take it for granted that the platform is sound and reproducible, and then you're changing part of it to attack a particular disease component. And of course, gene editing or modification of gene function, critical to that and so much a part of what you're doing. These are tremendous opportunities, never been a better time, but we have enormous headwinds at the same time. Our healthcare system has become completely financialized, and since I've been back out as a civilian for almost 2 months now, I've been spending a lot of time talking with friends. I was a busy clinical practitioner for most of my career. Everyone is being told now in our healthcare system that your job is to find patients on whom we can make money because there's a huge financial need in the system. And the system is amazingly fragmented into parts and components that don't fit together well and sub-optimized, and that each component is being told to make ends meet for your component without consideration of what it does to the system as a whole. And as I look at the complexity of healthcare for the people that you represent and are dealing with, it's absolutely essential that we do the opposite, that we have the pieces fit together in a way where the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And at the core, and very much related to some of the discussions you're having about newborn screening, for example, we have a uniquely inadequate primary care system in the United States compared with other high-income countries. And our public health system is being disassembled as we speak right now. So those without means, when you think about the technologies that could help people, are going to have a very difficult time unless we do something different in that regard. Now, I did use Gemini for this part because it was very noticeable to me as I called friends that clinicians right now are feeling enormous pressure on the financial side, and so much so that they're in pain because of it, something that's been called moral injury. And so I made up this slide with the help of AI to sort of contrast medicine as a profession and medicine as a business. And I would just say that based on what I'm hearing in the United States, medicine as a business is winning out right now, far and away. And it's going to be critical for all of us to pay attention to the values on that lower left-hand corner of medicine as a profession. And here I'm not just talking about doctors, I'm talking about all the clinicians involved in multidisciplinary care. And then it's already been alluded to, I liked the discussion of public affairs, very nice words we use to describe things that I don't think are quite so nice. We are, I believe now, in a situation where our system is going to be shattered, and it's being done on purpose with a belief of those who are doing it that something better will take its place. And it struck me that Humpty Dumpty was a great analogy, but I've learned that 99% of Americans only know the first verse of Humpty Dumpty. And you'll remember that all the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty Dumpty back together again. But if you look at the full lyrics over there, the fifth verse on the right, actually in the end, they did figure out how to put Humpty Dumpty together again. And so I hope I'm wrong. You know, we always hope for the best, but we need to prepare for the worst. I would expect a lot of the safety net things that you have depended on are going to fall apart in the near future because they're simply not going to be funded. Much like my employees at FDA that I worked with until 2 months ago, who got an email at 4 o'clock in the afternoon saying you're fired, you have to clean out your office in an hour, you get paid for a month, and then you have no benefits. And I'm talking about people with recent PhDs with debt and children in grammar school in the middle of a semester. But the next target is universities, and we're beginning to see this now roll out. So this infrastructure that you've depended on, including the healthcare delivery system, as discussed about Medicaid, I think is going to undergo a tremendous shock. All right, so now quickly to go through some themes as we think about how to deal with all this, just one at a time and very quickly. I hardly need to talk about science. You all can already tell, have so much expertise at a detailed level that I'm too old to learn at this point. But just speaking from the view of the FDA commissioner, it was just awesome to see how much things were changing with regard to understanding disease etiology, but also now having such a short pathway from disease etiology to therapies that could be effective. We've also made a lot of progress in regulatory science, and I'll say a bit more about that, because all the research in the world is not going to be helpful if it's not translated into therapies that are effective and can be used in practice. A lot of progress in thinking about clinical trials, and I'm a clinical trialist and a clinician by profession, and my field was in very large clinical trials in common diseases. You all are at the other end of the spectrum. And I think we're now making significant progress in understanding how to use probabilistic methods to understand better how to quantify the risks and benefits and the uncertainty as we do necessarily small clinical trials. And so in sum, and I think it's represented by the enthusiasm that I think you should have, you can tell I'm sort of schizophrenic. We should never before could we have been as enthusiastic as we are now, but we do have this other side of the coin that we have to deal with. It really feels like to me that for many rare diseases, if there was just enough capital and interested scientists, an effective therapy could be developed. And so it's a matter of putting these pieces together on the science front. But the healthcare front, I just want to give you a snapshot of why I think what you're particularly interested in may come under stress because of the other side of the coin. Most people still are surprised when I put the data forward that in the U.S. now we have the shortest life and the shortest healthy life of any large high-income countries. We're in last place. And I think it's largely driven by the way our healthcare system is organized, because we're inventing all the things that the rest of the world is using more effectively in its population. And we have a growing shortage of clinicians, and I think very pertinent to you, especially primary care and pediatrics, where the residencies are not filling and the pay is low compared with other specialties, and the pain of working in a clinic where you know you can't do the job that you want to do or that you're capable of doing because of the financial pressure to see more patients in a shorter period of time. Just to make the point, this is one of my favorite slides, although it's a painful slide to show. If you look in the lower left-hand corner there, you'll see that the U.S. and all other high-income countries had about the same life expectancy for the same amount of money spent. And then as time goes on, every other high-income country gravitates to the upper left-hand corner, much greater life expectancy, some increase in cost. There's one outlier, the United States, which is a uniquely bad business deal, shorter life expectancy for double the cost. So how is it that we can have a system which costs twice as much and delivers approximately half the benefit in terms of growth of life expectancy? And of course, this is not pertinent to many of us in this room who might be professors or highly educated people. We have these enormous discrepancies that are growing, as shown in this map of the country, where premature deaths are occurring very disproportionately in particular counties and in particular parts of the country. And there's a growing gap not only in terms of wealth, which is a huge issue, but magnified are the health differences in people as a function of these differences in wealth. So poor people have much shorter lives than wealthier, highly educated people, and this gap is growing at a very significant rate right now. And a college degree actually is important for some things, and right now we have an 8-year difference in life expectancy if you have a college degree compared to if you don't, and this gap is also growing significantly. So the discussion about the public policy related to Medicaid translates into real lives lost if there's not support for those people. Imagine if it gets worse than it is now. And in the midst of all this, our population is aware that something's not right. In a poll done by the Harris poll just a few months ago, 2/3 of Americans agree with the statement, "I have to be responsible for my health because no one else seems to care." Now, this is in a setting where all of our health systems and insurance companies are saying that they're patient-centered. So people know that something's not right. And in addition to that, over half of Americans couldn't raise $5,000 for a health care out-of-pocket expense. This is a tremendous source of pressure and disruption. There is no immediate solution that's obvious, and I think it does underlie a lot of the discontent that you see in the country. And then I'm going to add one more element to this, and this is a slide I borrowed from Sharon said. I had the privilege as a faculty member working with Priya Krishnani and Y.T. Chen as they developed the treatment for Pompei's disease, and I saw what was involved. And there's a prevalent misconception out there that all the work that is being talked about at this meeting is curing disease. And I think in some cases that will be the case. But what I saw with Pompei's disease was not children who were cured, but children who were alive, who would not have been alive before, who were much more functional, but now have a whole set of chronic diseases that had never been described before because there was no one alive to have that disease. And I'm particularly personally sensitive to this because our oldest daughter was born with complex congenital heart disease. She had a big operation at age 4 months and is still alive, actually a study coordinator today in her 40s, doing quite well. But there's a whole generation of adults with congenital heart disease who just didn't exist before. And so the natural history of their lives and the problems they have with their health care are undefined and require teams of people in a setting in which we are short of teams of people and the healthcare system is not delivering what it needs to deliver, even for people who have relatively simple healthcare needs. Are you depressed enough already? But I look at this, and if you follow Ted Lasso, you'd say, if we were in a soccer league in Europe, we would be relegated to the next league down in the United States, given the outcomes that we're now having. But it's people like you who can make the difference in turning these things around. And I will say the interactions that have occurred between the regulatory system and people like you have really made a huge difference. You're well aware that largely because of pressure that people like you put on, there's now collaboration between the drug and biologics part of the FDA that didn't exist before, very focused on new methods to deal with this issue of what do we do with small populations where you can't do the big clinical trials that have been the foundation of regulatory science. And a great use of patient-focused drug development, wanting to help the development of treatments that really speak to the needs of patients, not just what the researchers think is important. The accelerated approval program, I think, is on a solid base and will continue despite the criticism, which is understandable, and I know it's critical to your community. We have a continued need for regulatory science, and I hope you'll continue your advocacy for that. But we do have uncertainty with the workforce and a lot of pressure for deregulation, which is problematic. Deregulation where it's helpful is a great thing, but it was still the case when I left the FDA that 90% of drugs that got into phase 1 still didn't make it to market because of unexpected toxicity, or the target was engaged, but not enough of an effect on biology to have a beneficial clinical effect. And so we've got to be sure that when we tell people, especially at the price that drugs currently cost, we got to be as sure as we can that the benefits do outweigh the risks so that we don't hurt people. I'm going to skip through this part very quickly, but just when you deal with the FDA, assuming things stay on target, keep in mind that the FDA is an environment that regulates about 20% of the economy. And just to give you a snapshot, about 40% of the FDA deals with food. The Center for Veterinary Medicine is responsible for animal drugs and biologics, in addition to many of the issues related to animals as food. You're very well aware of drugs, devices, and biologics, and of course tobacco is a big part of the FDA. Still very pertinent to the people that you care about. Tobacco is particularly bad for people who have other significant comorbidities. The mission at the FDA is protecting the public health, but also at the same time speeding innovation. And it's this balance of protecting public health and speeding innovation. Everybody has an opinion about it. Almost 100% of people I've learned think the FDA is either too fast or too slow at the same time. So I think, my general rule of thumb is everybody's pissed off. We've done a pretty good job at the FDA. But this last one is very important, and I'm going to say a few more words about this, but it is in the FDA mission to get information to people about products across this vast gamut of 20% of the economy. And it's almost an impossible task and something that all of us need to pay a lot of attention to right now for particular reasons. Tobacco I'll skip over for now, but also very important, and I think pertinent to things that could happen even this year, the residual effort at places like FDA to be prepared for the next disaster, a pandemic, hurricane, tornado, all sorts of things like that is a very important part of the mission of the FDA and goes on in the background whether the disaster is occurring now or not. But if we're not prepared for the next disaster, and I will say we are not prepared for the next pandemic right now, this could be really devastating to people. And then finally, I know this is a political statement, but as you deal with the FDA, I still have a lot of affinity for the people that I left when I finished my term. You need to be aware that this is the way they're being treated. This is a statement from the head of the Office of Management and Budget, which is the office that sits atop all the federal agencies and directs the way personnel are treated. We want bureaucrats to be traumatically affected. When they wake up in the morning, we want them to not want to go to work because they're increasingly viewed as the villains. We want their funding to be shut down, so on and so forth. We want to put them in trauma. Now, I don't know how you feel when you go to work, if you go to work every day, but imagine as you talk with these people, this is what they're being exposed to in terms of the way they're being treated in their everyday lives at work. And regardless of what the purpose is, I have to speak out and say that that's no way to treat fellow human beings, no matter what. But we'll see where all this ends up. And so you come into play as absolutely critical. And I think you all have put together an exemplary organization. I particularly like the fact that you're an umbrella for numerous diseases, because one thing that's worried me over the years of working with advocacy and in regulation is that it is very obvious that therapeutic development and treatment for diseases with effective advocacy does better than for diseases without effective advocacy. And I've always felt bad that some diseases end up getting more treatments just because the pull-through of effective advocacy makes a difference. And we ought to have some systematic way of helping everyone advocate effectively for their problems in general. I always have to note that there's still a residual element of concern about conflict of interest. I noticed that my name badge had Sarepta on it, which for me is a particularly traumatic situation given all the controversy about things that happened when I was FDA commissioner twice. I have nothing against Sarepta. It's just whenever you have so much money changing hands and so many needs for patients, there's got to be a lot of attention paid to how we handle the conflicts of interest that are involved. I have opinions on this, but we don't have time to go into them now. Now, the last part is the information ecosystem, which I think is absolutely an essential part that we need to pay a lot more attention to. Right now, our information systems are still fragmented. For an individual patient, a doctor can get information from almost any health system because it's against the law to block it. But for research and learning and understanding, it is still a very difficult job to put the information together that's needed. So we need to integrate information across the healthcare system and including digital information not in the traditional system. And I believe it really ought to get back to the patient-centric slogan that we've been using and actually make it a reality. I can assure you, having spent 5 years working at Alphabet and now seeing everything from the point of view of the FDA, there is no technological limitation to making this happen. The problem is that we are so fragmented and incentivized to protect our own data, even if it's at the expense of the well-being of the patient. We're going to have to get over that. And I don't think it's hyperbole to say that AI is going to make a big difference. I'm going later this week to a big AI conference in San Francisco. I'm a radical enthusiast for AI as a way to skip across and bridge things that used to be disparate in a way we just couldn't do before. But we're also in an era where social media is important, and our patients are being barraged 24/7 by misinformation, which is incorrect information, disinformation, which is purposefully incorrect information, and malinformation, which is disinformation with a specific intent to harm people. In other words, if you wanted to harm people, one of the best ways to do it would be to give them bad information about their health. For example, not taking a proven treatment in favor of something that was completely unproven. And I would urge you, if you have a little reading time, to read the National Academies of Medicine report that just came out in December about this. Or if, depending on your level of tolerance for reading, there are 3 books that I would highly recommend. Many of you know that Francis Collins was very important to the development of many things that are critical to what you've done. He has a very simple book out in the last year that I would highly recommend to read, The Road to Wisdom. And it has a diagram in it that's very simple. I love it. I think it makes a very important point. There are a few things that are necessary truths. 2 plus 2 is 4. The earth is not flat. We shouldn't be having arguments about those things. But that's a very small bit of the total information that's in this expanse of the internet that we're now dealing with. And then there's a larger set of things that are firmly established fact, where benefits outweigh risks for treatments based on well-done clinical trials would be a good example. But most of the information that's in the internet is either uncertain or just an opinion. In fact, if you go on the web and just search, you'll see all kinds of opinions and ideas which are not based on fact. So this leads to a situation in which, and this gets back to Harari's book. For those of you who are avid readers, you may have read *Sapiens*, which was a very popular book that he wrote. Now he's written one on information networks. And a quote I love is, "Truth is a rare and expensive type of information." The reason is because if you want to tell the truth, you're obligated to do the work to be confident that what you're saying is the truth. If you want to tell a lie, you can just tell a lie. It doesn't take any work. So truth is behind the paywall, but lies are free. All of this is eroding confidence, not just in institutions like the FDA, but in basic medical care itself. And those of you who are researchers need to pay a lot of attention to this, in my view. The decline in public confidence is not just in our big institutions, but now our medical system is very much in the mainstream of a decline in confidence from the public. And this erodes the very purpose for which we're here. We are here because we're sharing information among professionals who spend their careers being experts, and lay people who are expert advocates joining together on a common base of knowledge and information which will improve human health. But if there's no confidence in this common base of information that we know which parts of it are true and are factual and which parts are opinion or actually are incorrect, we have a real problem in terms of how we'll affect the public. So finally, how do we think holistically to get the whole greater than the sum of the parts? And here there's some really big questions. I don't want to bore you with this, but as I was leaving FDA, we had a lot of interesting meetings about this, particularly related to rare disease. Is there a viable financial and organizational model for manufacturing and the cost of clinical trials? Is there a viable model for companies to distribute reliable products on a global basis if there's a disease with 100 to 1,000 people? Is there a model for clinical care teams and payment for therapies if we develop, as is now possible, effective treatments for 1,000 or 2,000 or 5,000 or 100,000 rare diseases? I would say there's not. So this is work ahead of us that we need to do. I love it because this is a problem we couldn't even think about before, because there was, most of these diseases, there was nothing in sight that could possibly be an effective treatment. Now we have the possibility of doing something, but we're going to have to reinvent the way we do things, because we can't take 2,000 rare diseases and charge $2 million every time we want to have a single treatment and a single patient. It's not going to be economically viable. This is another slide I stole just to make the point, as Sharon has made, that you've had tremendous success. So this is a good problem to have, but it's one that we've got to take seriously and address. And it's now magnified by God knows how many gene therapy opportunities. I'm out of time, so I'm going to just move ahead and say what I hope you all will do, and what I think you're on the way to do now, is to develop systems through your care networks and other systems where people who have medical problems and issues can have their data looked at continuously and to have continuous learning in the system. And then, using the power of numbers, because we now no longer have technological limitations to putting the information together, to do clinical trials at the right time and the right people for the right reasons. Right now, there is no unifying system to do this kind of work. If someone is developing a treatment with an intention of marketing it, then it's clearly in the FDA's domain in the pre-market phase. But much of the activity that needs to go on It's going to be now we'll have multiple treatments for multiple diseases. No one knows which is better. There is no system for figuring that out. This is something that I think the advocacy groups have a great chance to play a critical role in putting together, because your families are going to need this information. Out of the many choices that will be available, which ones are best? And so I'll conclude with just 2 slides. And I just want to make the point that the opportunity is tremendous right now. Believe it or not, when I was a first-year medical student, I went to a grand rounds, and I was treated to Dr. Stanley Appel in a shouting match with a man who became my mentor, Dr. Eugene Stead, about I think it was a rare neurologic condition in that grand rounds. Sounds like you remember it, actually. But at the time, the way you were known as a great student was you could find the reference in the library and use the Xerox machine to make a copy of the article to hand out. Now students don't even know what that picture was. A library, what is that? Now we're in an era where, for sure, we're going to have AI-assisted clinical care with systems in which much of the mundane work can be done by a machine. That is either going to free up human beings to spend more time with patients to deliver better basic human care, which is what people want, or we can have the people running the financial systems tell clinicians to see 2 or 3 times as many patients in the same time. You probably don't have to guess which way I hope it goes, but your voices will be very important in making this happen. I hope this has given you a lot to think about. I know sometimes I sound depressing. I'm actually very enthusiastic. This is an opportunity, and it's people like you who can really make the difference, but you're going to have to get out there and let your voices be heard. Thank you.